Madrid, 1598. The most powerful empire on earth couldn't pay its soldiers. Spanish silver fleets arrived weekly from the Americas, yet the royal treasury was empty. King Philip II defaulted on sovereign debt for the fourth time in 45 years. Within a generation, Spain would lose its status as a superpower, never to recover. London, 1956. Britain controlled a quarter of the world's landmass. Then Suez happened. When President Eisenhower threatened to dump British bonds, Prime Minister Eden withdrew forces in humiliation. The empire that ruled the seas for 300 years collapsed in 72 hours. The pound sterling lost reserve currency status within a decade. Moscow, 1985. The Soviet Union possessed 45,000 nuclear warheads and the world's largest military. 4 years later, it didn't exist. Not from war, not from revolution, it simply stopped functioning. The dissolution happened so fast that international observers didn't believe it was real until Soviet flags were physically removed from government buildings. I've been studying imperial collapse for 8 years. I've analyzed economic data, military records, and social indicators from 27 major powers throughout history. And I discovered something that terrifies me. They all followed the same pattern, the same 7 stages, the same sequence of events, the same predictable trajectory from dominance to irrelevance. And when I applied this pattern to the United States today, matching each stage against current data, I found something I wasn't expecting. The United States is currently at stage 5, the same stage where Spain was in 1588, Britain in 1950, and the Soviet Union in 1988. The stage where collapse becomes mathematically inevitable. The stage where the momentum cannot be reversed by policy, leadership, or reform. This isn't political commentary. This isn't prediction. This is pattern recognition, and the pattern has never been wrong. What this really means. When most people think about imperial collapse, they imagine war, invasion, or sudden catastrophe. That's not how it works. Empires don't fall from external pressure. They collapse from internal contradictions that reach critical mass. The 7-stage pattern I'm about to show you isn't theory. It's documented across Spanish records from the 1500s, British archives from the 1900s, and Soviet documents released after 1991. Each empire left detailed evidence of exactly what happened, when it happened, and why their leadership couldn't stop it. Here's what makes this pattern so reliable. It's driven by mathematics, not politics. Each stage triggers specific fiscal, social, and structural consequences that create conditions for the next stage. It's a cascade. Once you enter stage 3, reaching stage 7 is only a matter of time. The only variable is speed. Stage 1 is ascension. A nation rises through innovation, military success, or resource advantage. Spain discovered the Americas. Britain industrialized first. The Soviet Union collectivized production. The United States won World War II and rebuilt Europe. During this stage, growth seems limitless. Confidence is absolute. The future appears secured. Stage 2 is peak. The empire reaches maximum territorial, economic, and cultural influence. Spain in 1580 controlled the Philippines, the Americas, and much of Europe. Britain in 1920 administered 23% of the world's population. The Soviet Union in 1975 competed equally with the United States in every metric. Peak feels permanent. Leaders believe they've transcended historical limits. Stage 3 is overextension. Military commitments exceed economic capacity. Spain fought simultaneous wars in the Netherlands, France, and England while administering colonies across 2 continents. Britain maintained bases in 70 countries while funding 2 world wars. The Soviet Union occupied Eastern Europe while fighting in Afghanistan. The costs become unsustainable, but prestige prevents retreat. Stage 4 is fiscal crisis. Debt compounds faster than economic growth. Inflation appears, currency weakens. Spain defaulted on sovereign debt 4 times between 1557 and 1647. Britain required American loans to avoid bankruptcy after World War II. The Soviet Union printed rubles with no backing while grocery shelves emptied. Governments respond by increasing money supply, which accelerates the crisis. Stage 5 is loss of legitimacy. The population stops believing the system works. Not just disagreement with policy, fundamental loss of faith in institutions. Tax compliance falls, civil unrest increases, brain drain begins as talented people leave. Spain saw mass emigration to the Americas. Britain faced strikes that crippled the economy in the 1970s. The Soviet Union experienced the rise of black markets and widespread corruption as citizens stopped participating in official systems. This is where the United States is right now, and I can prove it. Stage 6 is institutional collapse. Government functions fail. Courts lose authority. Military loyalty fractures. Regional governors ignore central commands. Spain's viceroys in the Americas declared autonomy. Britain's colonies demanded independence. Soviet republics declared sovereignty before the USSR officially dissolved. The center cannot hold because it has lost both money and legitimacy. Stage 7 is dissolution. The empire ceases to exist as a unified entity. This doesn't always mean the country disappears. Spain and Britain still exist as nations, but they're no longer empires. They no longer project power. They're regional actors with historical memories of greatness. Here's what concerns me most about this pattern. Stage 5 is the point of no return. After you lose legitimacy, you cannot regain it through reform. The population has fundamentally stopped believing the system can deliver. No policy change, no political leader, no economic stimulus can restore that belief once it's gone. Spain tried. Philip III appointed reform councils. They failed. Britain tried. The post-war government implemented the welfare state. It delayed collapse, but didn't prevent it. The Soviet Union tried. Gorbachev introduced glasnost and perestroika. It accelerated the end. Once you're at stage 5, you're going to stage 7. The only question is how fast. Historical pattern layer. Let me show you how precise this pattern is by walking through each empire in detail. Spain, 1492-1648. Stage 1 occurred between 1492 and 1519. Columbus discovered the Americas. Cortez conquered the Aztecs. Spain suddenly controlled unprecedented wealth, silver mines that produced more precious metal than existed in all of Europe. The influx of capital funded the most powerful military on earth. Stage 2 peaked under Philip II, 1556 to 1598. Spain controlled the Philippines, most of Central and South America, the Netherlands, parts of Italy, and had the strongest navy in the world. Spanish was the diplomatic language. Spanish culture dominated. No rival came close. Stage 3 began with military overreach. Spain fought the Dutch Revolt, 1568-1648, sent the Armada against England, 1588, intervened in the French Wars of Religion, and maintained garrisons across 4 continents. The cost was staggering. Despite silver fleets arriving weekly from Potosi, the treasury couldn't keep up. Stage 4 manifested in serial defaults. Spain declared bankruptcy in 1557, 1560, 1575, and 1596. Each time, the Crown seized loans from private banks, destroying the merchant class. Interest rates spiked to 40% as lenders demanded risk premiums. The silver that should have made Spain rich instead flowed straight to foreign creditors. Stage 5 appeared in the early 1600s. The population stopped paying taxes. Castilian nobility refused conscription. Catalonia and Portugal began independence movements. The most telling indicator, Spanish intellectuals started emigrating. Cervantes wrote Don Quixote in 1605 as a satire of Spanish imperial delusion, a signal that even the cultural elite had lost faith. Stage 6 hit during the 30 Years' War, 1618-1648. Regional governors ignored Madrid's orders. The military lost battles it should have won because soldiers weren't paid. In 1640, Portugal successfully revolted. In 1648, Spain signed the Treaty of Westphalia, formally acknowledging it could no longer enforce its will. Stage 7 was complete by 1650. Spain remained a country, but it was no longer a great power. It would never again project significant influence beyond its borders. Time from stage 1 to stage 7, 158 years. Time from stage 5 to stage 7, 48 years. Britain, 1815 to 1956. Stage 1 followed the Napoleonic Wars. Britain emerged as the only major power not devastated by conflict. The Industrial Revolution gave it technological supremacy. The Royal Navy controlled global shipping lanes. The pound sterling became the world's reserve currency. Stage 2 peaked between 1880 and 1914. The British Empire governed 23% of the world's population. London was the financial capital. British coal powered the world. British banks financed global trade. The sun literally never set on British territory. Stage 3 began with World War I. Britain won the war, but lost the financial capacity to maintain the empire. The cost was $35 billion, more than the entire British economy at the time. To fund it, Britain borrowed heavily from the United States. After the war, maintaining imperial garrisons in India, Africa, and the Middle East became unsustainable, but withdrawal was seen as unthinkable. Stage 4 accelerated after World War II. Britain was technically victorious but financially destroyed. American loans came with conditions including dismantling trade preferences in the empire. The pound faced repeated devaluation crises. In 1947, India gained independence, not because Britain chose to leave, but because it couldn't afford to stay. Stage 5 crystallized in the 1950s. The Suez Crisis of 1956 was the defining moment. When Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, Britain and France invaded. The United States threatened to crash the pound. Britain withdrew in humiliation. The message was clear. Britain no longer controlled its own foreign policy. Domestically, strikes paralyzed industries. Brain drain began as professionals emigrated to America, Canada, and Australia. Stage 6 came rapidly in the 1960s and 1970s. Colonies declared independence in quick succession: Malaysia, Kenya, Nigeria, Jamaica, and dozens more. By 1970, the empire was effectively gone. Britain faced an IMF bailout in 1976, the ultimate symbol of reduced status. Stage 7 was formalized by 1980. Britain remained a country, a nuclear power, and a UN Security Council member. But it was no longer an empire. It was a regional power dependent on American military protection and European trade. Time from Stage 1 to Stage 7, 165 years. Time from Stage 5 to Stage 7, 24 years. Soviet Union, 1945-1991. Stage 1 followed World War II. The Soviet Union defeated Nazi Germany, occupied Eastern Europe, and emerged as a superpower. Stalin's industrialization had worked. The USSR could match American production in steel, tanks, and weapons. Stage 2 peaked under Brezhnev, 1964-1982. The Soviet Union achieved nuclear parity. It launched the first satellite, the first man in space. It supported communist movements on every continent. Soviet military spending matched American spending, despite having a much smaller economy. Stage 3 came from the arms race and imperial commitments. The Soviet Union maintained 500,000 troops in Eastern Europe, fought in Afghanistan, and funded proxy wars in Angola, Ethiopia, and Nicaragua. The cost consumed 15 to 20% of GDP, an unsustainable burden. Stage 4 manifested in economic stagnation. By 1980, Soviet GDP growth had fallen to near zero. Oil revenue masked the problem temporarily, but when oil prices dropped in 1986, the facade collapsed. Stores had nothing to sell. The black market became the only functioning economy. The ruble was worthless outside Soviet borders. Stage 5 arrived with stunning speed under Gorbachev. Glasnost revealed the system's failures to the population. People stopped believing communist ideology. Workers stopped pretending to work. The phrase became common. We pretend to work, they pretend to pay us. Baltic states demanded autonomy. Intellectuals openly criticized the regime. The legitimacy that held the system together simply evaporated. Stage 6 came in 1989-1991. Eastern European countries rejected Soviet control. Soviet republics declared independence. The military refused orders to suppress protests. Boris Yeltsin, as Russian president, commanded more authority than Gorbachev, the Soviet president. The institutions existed on paper, but had no real power. Stage 7 happened on December 26, 1991. The Soviet Union was formally dissolved. It didn't lose a war. It didn't face revolution. It just stopped existing because no one believed in it anymore. Time from Stage 1 to Stage 7, 46 years. Time from Stage 5 to Stage 7, 6 years. Notice the acceleration. Spain took 48 years from Stage 5 to Stage 7. Britain took 24 years. The Soviet Union took 6 years. Each collapse happened faster than the last because information moves faster, capital moves faster, and social consensus breaks faster in each successive era. Modern data layer. Now let me show you why the United States is at Stage 5. Stage 1 and 2 are complete. The United States rose to dominance after World War II, Stage 1, and peaked between 1945 and 1991, Stage 2. After the Soviet collapse, America was the sole superpower, the unipolar moment. This isn't controversial. Everyone agrees these stages are in the past. Stage 3 is complete. Overextension is measurable. The United States maintains 750 military bases in 80 countries. It's fighting or conducting operations in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, Yemen, and Niger. It's committed to defending NATO members, Japan, South Korea, and Israel. The cost is $877 billion annually, more than the next 10 countries combined. But here's the key metric. Military spending as a percentage of GDP is sustainable. The problem is that these commitments exceed military capacity. The U.S. cannot simultaneously defend Taiwan, deter Russia, and maintain Middle East presence. Overextension isn't about spending, it's about impossible commitments. Stage 4 is complete. The fiscal crisis is undeniable. U.S. national debt is $34 trillion, 123% of GDP. Annual deficits are $1.7 trillion. Interest payments on debt now exceed defense spending, $659 billion in 2023. The Federal Reserve printed $5 trillion between 2020 and 2022. Inflation hit 9%, the highest in 40 years. These are not normal fluctuations. These are the debt dynamics that preceded every major collapse. Compared to historical precedents, Spain's debt reached 60% of revenue. Before defaults began, Britain's debt hit 250% of GDP after World War II. Soviet debt was hidden, but estimated at 70% of GDP in 1985. The US is in the same range. More importantly, the trajectory is accelerating. Debt is growing faster than the economy. This is the mathematical signature of Stage 4. Stage 5 is active right now. Loss of legitimacy is harder to measure than debt, but the indicators are clear. Trust in government. Pew Research shows trust in federal government is at 16%, the lowest in 70 years of polling. In 1964, it was 77%. This isn't partisan. Trust has collapsed among both Republicans and Democrats. Institutional confidence. Gallup tracks confidence in major institutions. Congress, 7%. Supreme Court, 25%. Presidency, 23%. Media, 11%. These numbers would have been unthinkable 30 years ago. Tax compliance. IRS data shows the tax gap, the difference between owed and paid taxes, reached $688 billion in 2021, up from $450 billion in 2011. This is a 53% increase in a decade. When citizens stop voluntarily complying with tax law, it's a sign they no longer believe the system is legitimate. Brain drain. For the first time in American history, more Americans are renouncing citizenship than applying for it in certain years. High net worth individuals are establishing residency in Portugal, Singapore, and UAE. The number of Americans living abroad permanently increased from 4 million in 2000 to 9 million in 2023. Civil unrest, political violence has increased. The January 6th Capitol riot, regardless of your political interpretation, would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. BLM protests in 2020 resulted in $2 billion in property damage. These aren't protests against specific policies. They're expressions of fundamental illegitimacy. Separatist sentiment. Polling shows 29% of Americans believe states should have the right to secede. In 1995, that number was 8%. Texas and California both have active independence movements that would have been fringe jokes a generation ago. Here's what makes this stage 5. It's not that people disagree with the government. It's that they no longer believe the system can work. Republicans think elections are rigged. Democrats think the Supreme Court is illegitimate. Both sides believe institutions serve elites, not citizens. This is loss of legitimacy. And here's the terrifying parallel. Spain experienced this in 1610, Britain in 1950, the Soviet Union in 1985. In each case, the population simply stopped believing the empire could deliver prosperity, security, or justice. Once that belief is gone, it cannot be restored. The hidden mechanism. Here's the part nobody talks about: why stage 5 is irreversible. Legitimacy isn't a policy. It's not a law you can pass or a program you can fund. Legitimacy is collective belief. When a population believes a system is legitimate, they follow laws without enforcement, pay taxes without audits, and accept outcomes they don't like. When that belief is gone, the state must use force to extract compliance. But force is expensive and creates more resistance, which requires more force, which creates more resistance. It's a death spiral. Spain tried to restore legitimacy by reforming taxation. It failed because the tax collectors were seen as thieves. Britain tried by creating the welfare state. It failed because the cost accelerated the fiscal crisis. The Soviet Union tried through glasnost. It failed because transparency revealed the depth of dysfunction. The United States is trying to restore legitimacy through polarization. Each party promises to defeat the other and fix the system. It won't work. Here's why. Both parties are operating within a system the population no longer believes in. It doesn't matter which party wins elections if citizens believe elections are illegitimate. It doesn't matter which judges are appointed if citizens believe the courts serve power. It doesn't matter which policies are implemented if citizens believe the government is captured by elites. This is the hidden mechanism of stage 5. Legitimacy death spirals are self-reinforcing. Each attempt to restore order through force, surveillance, or control further proves to the population that the system is illegitimate. Each revelation of corruption, incompetence, or dysfunction confirms their belief that the system cannot be reformed. Spain's Philip III appointed reform councils. They were seen as corrupt. Britain's post-war government implemented nationalization. It was seen as socialist failure. The Soviet Union's Gorbachev introduced transparency. It revealed the system was built on lies. The United States is trying stimulus, infrastructure spending, and political prosecutions. From one perspective, these are legitimate governance tools. From another, they're proof that elites will do anything to maintain power. The interpretation depends on whether you still believe in the system's legitimacy. And here's the data point that keeps me up at night. 67% of Americans believe the country is on the wrong track. That number has been above 60% for 15 years straight. It doesn't matter who's president. It doesn't matter which party controls Congress. The population has made a fundamental judgment. This isn't working. That's stage 5. Eruption scenario. If the pattern holds, and it has held for 500 years, here's what stage 6 and stage 7 look like for the United States. Stage 6 will begin with institutional breakdown, not collapse. Breakdown. The difference is subtle but crucial. In breakdown, institutions still exist, but they stop functioning effectively. The first sign will be fiscal. A debt crisis triggers when foreign creditors, China, Japan, Europe, Stop buying Treasury bonds. It won't be announced. It'll be visible in auction results. When a Treasury auction fails to clear, when interest rates spike above 8 to 10%, the Federal Reserve will have to buy the debt directly. This is monetizing the debt, the final stage of fiscal crisis. When that happens, inflation returns. Not 3 to 4%, not 9% like 2022, double-digit sustained inflation. The dollar weakens on international markets. Oil-producing nations stop pricing oil in dollars. The dollar milkshake theory reverses. Instead of capital flowing into the U.S., it flows out. Domestically, states begin ignoring federal mandates, not in open rebellion, through non-compliance. States refuse to enforce federal laws they disagree with. This is already happening with marijuana legalization, immigration policy, and gun control. It will accelerate to taxes, environmental regulations, and eventually federal court orders. The military remains loyal to command, but recruitment collapses. Who volunteers to defend a system they don't believe in? The U.S. military is already missing recruitment goals by 25%. That number will grow. The all-volunteer force that has existed since 1973 becomes unsustainable. The second sign will be social fracture. Political violence increases. Not sporadic protests, sustained low-level conflict, militias in some states, Antifa in others. The federal government loses its monopoly on legitimate violence. Police forces struggle to recruit. Crime rises not because criminals are more active, but because enforcement breaks down. The third sign will be capital flight. The wealthy move assets offshore. Corporations relocate headquarters. The brain drain that started in stage 5 becomes a flood. The people with the most options leave first. Engineers go to Singapore. Financiers go to London or Dubai. Entrepreneurs go to jurisdictions with stable rule of law. Here's the timeline I see as most likely: 2025, 2028, debt crisis triggers. A failed Treasury auction or credit downgrade forces the Fed to monetize debt directly. Inflation returns. Dollar weakens but doesn't collapse. 2028, 2032, state non-compliance increases. Federal courts issue orders that states ignore. The Supreme Court loses enforcement power. Regional differences that were cultural become political, then jurisdictional. 2032, 2035, fiscal crisis reaches breaking point. Social Security and Medicare face cuts. Political violence increases. Military recruitment collapses. Capital flight accelerates. 2035 to 2040, Stage 7 begins. This doesn't mean the United States disappears. It means it's no longer a superpower. Regional powers, China, India, a united Europe, fill the vacuum. The U.S. becomes a large, important country like Russia is today, still dangerous, still nuclear armed, but no longer capable of projecting dominant power globally. What does Stage 7 actually look like? It's not Mad Max. It's not Civil War. It's Argentina in 2001. It's Britain in 1976. It's Russia in 1998. The government still exists. People still go to work. But the currency is weak, the economy is stagnant, the political system is gridlocked, and the international influence is gone. For citizens, it means lower standard of living, higher crime, less economic mobility, reduced international travel, restricted capital movement, and most importantly, the psychological adjustment of living in a formerly great nation that is now just another country. The warning. I need to be clear about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. I'm not saying the United States will disappear. Spain still exists. Britain still exists. Russia still exists. I'm saying the United States will lose its status as the dominant global power, and that this loss is being driven by the same pattern that has toppled every empire in modern history. I'm not saying this happens next year. Spain took 48 years from Stage 5 to Stage 7. Britain took 24 years. The Soviet Union took 6 years. The United States could take 15 to 20 years. But the direction is set. I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm not celebrating or mourning. I'm identifying a pattern that has proven consistent across 5 centuries and explaining why all available data suggests the United States is following that same pattern. Here's what I keep asking myself. If Spain's leaders in 1600 had access to this pattern, could they have changed course? If Britain's government in 1950 had understood they were at Stage 5, could they have prevented Stage 6? The answer appears to be no. Once you reach Stage 5, once you lose legitimacy, the cascade is inevitable. You can slow it with reforms, but you cannot stop it because the core problem isn't policy. The core problem is that the population has stopped believing the system serves them, and that belief cannot be restored through legislation, spending, or leadership. It would require a fundamental restructuring of the relationship between government and governed. It would require elites to voluntarily surrender power. It would require a level of national unity that doesn't exist when you're at Stage 5. Spain tried, Britain tried, the Soviet Union tried, they all failed. So here's my final question, the one I can't answer. Do you see the pattern now? Do you see the United States at stage 5, matching the indicators of every collapsed empire at the same point? And if you do see it, what are you going to do with that information? Because if the pattern holds, and it has never failed, we have somewhere between 10 and 25 years before stage 7 is complete. That's not enough time to reverse the pattern, but it is enough time to prepare for what comes after. The empires that collapsed didn't disappear. Their people survived. Some thrived. The question isn't whether the United States as an empire will persist. The pattern says it won't. The question is, what comes next, and who sees it coming in time to position themselves for that future? The businessman in 1929 who withdrew his savings survived. The one who trusted the system lost everything. The Soviet citizens who kept dollars survived. The ones who kept rubles lost their life savings. The pattern is clear. The timeline is set. The choice is yours.